So glycolysis is the enzymatic conversion of glucose to pyruvate. Okay? So glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. It's going to be converted to pyruvate at the end of glycolysis. Okay? So what you need to know is for glycolysis, what goes in and what goes out of this process. So as you can see here, 1 ATP is used to make the next intermediate, and the next intermediate is a 6-carbon molecule with a phosphate group attached to it, and the output is 1 ATP. And in the next step, you are going to use another ATP, and the enzyme PFK, we'll talk about it later, but it's basically responsible for homeostasis of your cell. So the next intermediate you're going to get is this carbon molecule with 2 phosphate groups attached to it, and you're going to make another ADP. So let's move on to this part. As you can see here, 2 NAD plus is going to come in. And what it's going to be doing is going to get oxidized into 2 NADH, and you're also going to make two 3-carbon molecules with 2 phosphate groups attached to them. And in the next step, 2 ADP is phosphorylated into 2 ATP, and your next intermediate is a 3-carbon molecule with 1 phosphate group on them. And finally, at the end, you're going to have 2 ATP, and you're going to have pyruvate, which is 3-carbon molecule. So I have a simplified chemical equation for glycolysis. So right here, the input is glucose, 2 ATP, plus 2 NAD plus 4 ADP, and 4 phosphate ions. And for your output, you're going to get 2 pyruvate, 4 ATP, 2 NADH, 2 water, and 2 ADP. What your textbook doesn't tell you is where the water came out of. And that you don't really need to know, but just know that water is output of glycolysis as well. They don't need to know that. Yeah. So things to remember for glycolysis is what goes in and what goes out of the process. And the key enzyme responsible that you need to know is hexokinase. So what does hexokinase do? And which step is it in? And PFK, I talk about PFK. I'm going to talk about PFK in a little bit. And how many carbon is glucose? How many carbon is pyruvate? What species gets oxidized? How are the enzymes regulated to maintain homeostasis?
Okay, so PFK here, phosphofructokinase, is an enzyme in glycolysis, and the key thing to remember about this is that this is a slow enzyme. So when the glycolysis gets to this step, this is the slowest step of the whole reaction. So this step determines the rate of the whole reaction because it's the slowest step. So how you know it's the slowest step is that when you try to see all the substrates for all the enzymes, PFK has a lot of buildup for its substrate. So that means it's working really slow, and the enzymes before it are working really fast. That's why they keep making the substrate for PFK, but PFK is too slow to process them into the next, for the next enzyme.
What happens to pyruvate afterward?
So pyruvate is not ready to go into the Krebs cycle. For the Krebs cycle, we need a 2-carbon molecule, but pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule.
Right.
So we have to modify it somehow.
So actually, that's a good time to bring up the other case as well. So in case 1, when you don't have enough oxygen available for your cells, they're going to go into an anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic stands for like no oxygen, basically. So here you see glycolysis, and the end product is 2-pyruvate, right? And then 2-pyruvate is going to be converted into 2-lactate. Basically, lactate is 2-lactic acid, and this process we call fermentation. So fermentation is really, really useful because you can make alcohol and yogurt and stuff like that in food microbiology. And in this process, there's an enzyme that is going to reduce NADH to NAD plus, and then that NAD plus is going to get recycled into the glycolysis. Just remember that. So the next case, Fatima talked about it. The 3 carbon needs to be modified to 2 carbon. So how we're going to do that is through pyruvate metabolism. So what's going to happen is that the 2 pyruvate are going to get oxidized to carbon dioxide and carbon acetyl group. And then that acetyl group is going to be covalently attached to this coenzyme called coenzyme A. And then what they're going to make is acetyl-CoA.
So just to clarify, your 3-carbon pyruvate goes into your 2-carbon acetyl by giving off 1 molecule of carbon dioxide.
One thing I forgot to mention is that also your as you can see here, there's NADH here, right? And it's going to get oxidized into 2-NADH. And that 2-NADH is going to be reduced into NADH. And this BG is going to be used in Krebs cycles later.
In electron transport chain.
Yeah, that too. In this case, your waste product is carbon dioxide. Yep. So to answer the second question, acetyl-CoA is going to be used in Krebs cycle. So one thing to remember is that glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm, and pyruvate metabolism happens in the matrix of the mitochondria. Krebs cycle also happens in the matrix. ETC happens in the inner membrane, and chemiosmosis happens in the inner membrane, and then it goes to the matrix.
Yeah, so it happens between the space between the inner membrane and the outer membrane. So if you want to point at it, it's like this dark space here.
Inner membrane.
Yeah, so this blue one is the inner membrane, and then the red one is the outer membrane. So the space between them is where the electron transport chain happens.
All right. So next is the Krebs cycle. As you can see, there's 2 pictures. One is from your textbook, and one is from Fatima's review session last night. So basically, I just want to use this as to compare. So remember what I said about acetyl-CoA coming into Krebs cycle? So right here, acetyl-CoA is going to be covalently attached to 4-carbon molecule, and then it is going to be this is called citric acid, right? And then that citric acid is going to be a 6-carbon molecule from now on. And what's going to happen is...
So here is where we enter. So acetyl-CoA, sorry, not CoA. CoA is removed before we enter the Krebs cycle. So acetyl enters the Krebs cycle and joins the 4-carbon molecule, which is oxaloacetate, and then it becomes a 6-carbon molecule, which is citric acid. And then 1 molecule of CO2 is given off, and then the 6-carbon molecule becomes a 5-carbon molecule. And when the CO2 is given off, you also reduce 1 NAD plus to 1 NADH. And then the same thing happens again. Your 5-carbon molecule gives off 1 CO2, and then 1 NAD plus is reduced to 1 NADH. And then your 4-carbon, so then you have a 4-carbon molecule. And now we don't want to give off any more carbon dioxide. We want to keep it at a 4-carbon oxaloacetate. So now we just modify it. So in this step, we have our ADP turned into ATP. So we make one molecule of ATP here. And then in the next step, we have FAD plus, which is reduced to FADH2, which is another energy carrying molecule, just like NAD plus. And then the cycle just repeats itself because you are at a 4-carbon molecule. You can put your second acetyl in, do the cycle all over again.
Okay. So
So here it says GTP and here it says ATP. I guess two like different. There were two different things, but they're both energy molecules.
Okay.
So just remember that.
Yep. Okay. Also, okay. What's going to happen to FADH2 and NADH? Like, are they just gonna? What are they gonna do?
So right now we're collecting them, and we're gonna use them in the electron transport chain. And this Krebs cycle, by the way, is happening in the matrix. So all of these molecules that we just made, they're all in the matrix. And we're going to use them in the electron transport chain. Okay. So before we do the electron transport chain, we have to review oxidation and reduction because it's all about that. So remember oil rig, oxidation is loss, reduction is gain of electrons. And then also remember that oxidation means breaking bonds and reduction means making bonds. And then we have here our NAD plus going to our NADH. So is it oxidation or reduction? So as we mentioned before, it's reduction, but knowing that here NAD has a positive charge, it means that there's nothing bonded to it, but then you bond this hydrogen to it. So then you added a bond, so that means that you reduced it. And the same thing with FAD, there should be a plus here, but I forgot to put it. So FAD plus goes and becomes FADH2. That's also reduced because it just made 2 more bonds.
Okay. So the reverse would be oxidation then?
Yeah, so the reverse of this would be oxidation.
Okay.
So now we're going to do electron transport chain. So to give you perspective of the mitochondria, so here is the matrix, and you have all these H plus ions here. So the matrix is acidic because there's a lot of H plus ions. This is the inner membrane, and you have a bunch of electron acceptors here, as you can see. These are different molecules that are going to accept electrons from our NADH and our FADH. And here the last one is oxygen. So now we are using oxygen in respiration towards the end. We don't use it in glycolysis or Krebs cycle, but we use it in electron transport chain. So this is happening in the inner membrane, and then this is that space between the inner and the outer membrane that I was showing you in the picture. And then this is the outer membrane, and then this would be outside the mitochondria, like the cytoplasm. So let's start. So we have a bunch of energy carrying molecules like NADH and FADH. So they get oxidized back into NAD+. So NADH gets oxidized back into NAD+. And it gives those electrons to this electron acceptor because it's getting oxidized, so it's losing electrons, and it's giving those electrons to the electron acceptor. And then these are in a line, as you see, so they take these electrons and they pass them all the way to the end. So they're all going to pass these electrons to oxygen. And every time you pass an electron to give it to the electron transport chain, one H plus crosses the membrane and goes from here to the intermembrane space. So one H plus went from here to here as one electron crossed the membrane. So then next, we have our FADH2, which is going to be oxidized back into FAD plus. It's going to give its electrons to the electron acceptor, which is going to pass them on to the next one. And we're collecting all these electrons. So this acceptor got this electron, and then it got more electrons from here and passed them down. And then the same thing happened when H plus went and crossed the membrane and went to the other side. And then we have, so as you saw in the Krebs cycle and in glycolysis, we had a lot of FADH. So now is the time where we're going to use them all, take their electrons, put them in the electron transport chain, and get all these H pluses to go to the other side. So when it's time for oxygen, oxygen takes all of these electrons and gets reduced. So it's gaining electrons and it's getting reduced and it's making bonds. So it's making bonds with two H pluses from here, from the matrix, and it's going to make water. So as if you remember, water is one of the byproducts as well as CO2 of respiration. So that's what oxygen does with all of these electrons. And then we still have, so at the end, now we have a bunch of H plus ions in the intermembrane space, and they need to go back to the matrix because we can't have a low pH for the intermembrane space. But the only way they can go back to the matrix is through ATP synthase, which is the enzyme in the inner membrane. So as they cross ATP synthase, they generate ATP. So one H plus will cross this enzyme, and in return, this enzyme will add a phosphate to ADP to make ATP. And since we have a lot here, these are just a few that I have represented here, but we actually have a lot here. So every time an H plus goes through, we have an ATP. And we end with 34 ATPs just from the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. So this part of the hydrogens moving back to the matrix is the chemiosmosis part. And we get 34 ATP per molecule of glucose. So this is just for one glucose. And if you use more glucose, obviously you're going to get way more. So we get 34 just from ETC and chemiosmosis. We got 2 from Krebs cycle, 1 from 1-acetyl, and since we had 2, so that's why we got 2, and then 2 from glycolysis, and then we end with 38 ATPs for one cycle of respiration.
Can you go back to the slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what makes the inner membrane space like? So you were talking about pH, right? So why would the pH be lower here?
So before we started, we had all our H pluses on this side.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the pH here was high, it was basic. But when our H pluses moved, every time an electron was given to the electron transport chain, the H pluses moved here and made this environment acidic and low pH.
So the more H plus that you have in a space, the lower the pH is going to be.